Pokemon Sword and Shield were the first games to introduce DLC into the franchise. This decision was one of the most controversial additions Game Freak has ever made, because coupled with all of the issues that the base game brought, now they wanted to make you pay for more? And you know what? I can't even blame anyone for hating, especially when it costs $30. But if I'm being honest, I've never played the DLC before. In fact, I've only just beat Sword and Shield. So today, I'm going to be playing through both the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra DLCs to see if they were actually good. So the first DLC we'll be taking on is the Isle of Armor, and the way you get here is by going to the first train station in the game. Now, this is where we caught that Galarian Slowpoke way back when, and we actually could have started the DLC just at the start of the game, really. Although I didn't want to because I feel like it would have been better with a fully established team. Also, there's a certain part of it that you kind of need to be high level anyway. But the way you actually get to the Isle of Armor is by having the armor pass, of course, and talking to this person who will take you there. Now, when you arrive, you meet Avery, and this is the person that we met when we caught that Slowpoke. They say that we are supposed to be joining some sort of dojo, which we are not informed of at least, and Avery asked to battle us. So this team is perhaps one of the most pathetic teams I've ever seen. It's an Abra and a Galarian Slowpoke, and that's it. Afterwards, Avery tells us that we are not good enough to be a part of the dojo, and then he leaves. Well, now we can explore the Isle of Armor, and this is a completely open world location, which is amazing. Honestly, it feels like a completely different game. Already, we can find a bunch of new Pokemon that we haven't seen before, which I guess might be controversial to be in the DLC, but hey, that's how it is. Anyway, we find this person who will upgrade our bike, which makes it look cooler, and up ahead we find the dojo that Avery was talking about. He seems to be having a conversation with a woman and tells her that we left and we didn't want to be a part of the dojo, which I guess isn't entirely wrong. But when we walk up, this woman introduces herself as Honey and tells us that she is the woman of the dojo, and she brings us inside. We see that there's a class going on right now and introduces us to the master of the dojo, who is a very old man and apparently her husband. Wonder what that age gap is. The master introduces himself as Mustard, and he challenges us to a battle. Now, much like Avery, his Pokemon are not that great, but to be fair, this part of the DLC is probably expected to be done at the start of the game, and the only thing different is that the levels are scaled. Once we beat him, he gives us the uniform to become a part of the dojo, which I guess we got roped into, but now he has us take on a trial that involves running around and catching these Slowpoke who have gone crazy in this field. This trial is as simple as it sounds, but I wanted to take this opportunity to also explore a lot of the Isle of Armor because, well, I was just really curious. But when we complete the trial and go back, we are congratulated and rewarded with one of the Gen 1 starters, well, except for Charizard, of course, because that one was already taken by Leon because he used to go to this dojo. I decided to take Squirtle, but realistically, this guy is not getting used. We are then told all about max soups, which is how people Gigantamax their Pokemon. Yes, the thing that I was talking about during my entire Sword and Shield playthrough that I was very jealous of. Now, to make this soup, we need to get max mushrooms, and that is our next trial. Finding these is actually pretty easy. We just have to go up ahead and into this cave. But when we find them, Avery pulls up and tries to steal them from us, so we battle him, and his team is still terrible. He starts off with Slowpoke, then Kadabra, and finally Woobat. Yeah, there's no way we would ever lose this battle. So we get the max mushrooms and go back to the dojo. When we get back, we start making the max soup, and then Avery arrives and they decide to use his mushrooms that he found instead, just because they feel bad for how sad he is. But when the soup is made, we feed it to Alcremie, and finally we have the giant cake Pokemon. Now, for our last trial, we are told that we will get the secret armor of the Isle of Armor if we defeat Avery in another battle. I have a feeling this will be very easy. Alright, well, Avery's first Pokemon this time is Galarian Ponyta. I don't know why they didn't give him Rapidash, but whatever. Anyway, this is obviously not a challenge. Then he sends out Kadabra, again, not Alakazam, I don't know why. I mean, this is supposed to be the final trial of this big event they're having for the dojo. I don't know why they just don't evolve his Pokemon. But finally, he actually does evolve one of his Pokemon, and he uses Galarian Slowbro. Now, of course, we Dynamax our Alcremie, or I guess I could finally say Gigantamax our Alcremie into this beauty, and he also does the same and Dynamaxes his Slowbro. And for once, this Pokemon is actually pretty strong, but we sent out Poltergeist and hit it with Shadow Ball to win the battle. After the battle, we get apologized to by Avery for all the annoyances, and we get rewarded with the secret armor of the Isle of Armor, which is a Pokemon. This is Kubfu, a Pokemon which will have a lot to do with the second part of the Isle of Armor storyline. That's right, this was only the beginning, and I mean, to be fair, I'm glad we have a lot more to do because that did not take very long. Now, our next goal is to take Kubfu around the Island of Armor and become more friendly with it. Now, the way we do this is by walking around with him and showing him different vantage points of the island. Oh, and yeah, I forgot to mention, you can walk around with your Pokemon in this game. Well, in this DLC. Now, this point in the DLC is very fun to just sit back and relax and just burn some time, but it's not very entertaining for a video. All we're doing is just walking around and sightseeing pretty much. Eventually, though, we are able to get its friendliness high enough and we take him back to the master. Mustard tells us that we need to take Kubfu to train in one of these two towers. One of them is a water-based tower and the other one is based on darkness. He mentions that depending on which one Kubfu takes on, his fighting style will permanently change. And while I eagerly wanted to take them on, specifically the water one, we have to train up a lot, like to level 70. So yeah. Let's go do that. Okay, fast forward about an hour and a half later, and our Kubfu is level 70 and ready to take on the Tower of Waters. All this is a series of battles, but you're only allowed to bring Kubfu. Fortunately, the other people also have one Pokemon. I'm not gonna lie, this wasn't really that difficult. We have a decent enough move set and the ability to power ourselves up with Bulk Up that we can one or two shot most of these Pokemon, except for the last one, of course, which is actually another Kubfu from the Master. Well, I'm being dramatic. We did two-shot it with close combat, cause we're faster than him. Alright, with the tower complete, we can finally show Kubfu the Scroll of Waters and evolve it into Urshifu. Now, technically speaking, this is a legendary Pokemon, and I don't know if I would say it's legendary, but it certainly is very strong. But randomly, right as we got our new Pokemon, Hop decides to show up, and we have a whole new quest. So apparently Urshifu has the ability to Gigantamax, but it doesn't really like the taste of max soup normally. Instead, it likes to have a certain sweet type of thing inside of the soup. I don't know why it's so important to Hop that he helps us, but he's going to help us. First, he wanted to check the forest because maybe a certain Pokemon here would produce a sweet nectar like a Lilligant or an Applin, but after a long sequence, we discover that no, this is not what we're looking for. Finally, he uses his brain and realizes it's just honey that we need, and we need to go find a Vespiquen. Fortunately for us, there's an island on the Island of Armor that has a Vespiquen hive, and when we check it, we get pulled into a max raid den. This fight is very easy for our Cinderace, and then we get the max honey completing this mission. Now all we have to do is collect some more of the max mushrooms so we can make a soup and eventually get the ability to Gigantamax Urshifu. Now that we have the soup and feed it to Urshifu, we can test it out in the last fight of the DLC against Mustard, this time going full strength. I haven't been giving basically any commentary on the battles in the DLC so far because, truth be told, they are pretty easy. Except for this one. This one is very hard. So for the first time, we really get to test out Urshifu, and let me tell you, this guy is broken. Alongside his insane stats, he has a move called Surging Strikes, which not only hits 3 times, but they're guaranteed critical hits and they hit through Protect. Mustard's first Pokemon, Mian Shao, hits us with Fake Out and then hits us with Close Combat, dropping our HP very low, but we one-shot it with Surging Strikes. His next Pokemon is Corviknight, so we sent out Cinderace and one-shot it with Pyro Ball. Next, he has a Lycanroc, and we throw out Poltergeist because it will go down to 2 Giga Drains, although he did set a Stealth Rock. Next is Luxray, who tanks Dragon Darts and one-shots our Dragapult. Yeah, I did not not know that Luxray could learn Play Rough, but I guess it makes sense. But we throw it out Creamy and take Luxray down with Dazzling Gleam. We then take a page out of his book when he throws out Kamo-O, and we send Boltund to use Play Rough, although it does not one-shot his guy, and we get taken down. So we use Cinderace again and use Flame Charge to take down Kamo-O, leaving him with his last Pokemon, Urshifu, and so I think it's only fitting we throw out ours. If you notice, his Urshifu is positioned a little differently than ours, and that's because his went to the Tower of Darkness, the one we didn't go to. And as cool as this mirror is, as you can see, he is 4 levels higher than us, so this is not going to end well. In fact, even though I tried my hardest, we could not defeat him with the combination of all of our Pokemon here. So I decided to take Urshifu, train him up a little bit, and give him a little better of a held item in order to beat him. Now the battle went mostly the same on the second time around, except the end where we were actually able to use our signature move and take down Urshifu and finally defeat Master Mustard. And with that, that's the end of the Isle of Armor. Alright, now we can go to the next DLC location, the Crown Tundra. We get here through the same train station as the Isle of Armor, and we find a huge tundra, much like the name has implied. Outside the station, we see a father and daughter having an argument, so we butt in and battle this man named Peony. Apparently, he is a former gym leader. He has a Caparaja and an Aggron, and once we beat him, we find out that his daughter has left. It seems that she wants to go somewhere called a Max Lair that has a lot of Dynamax Pokemon. So we head to this cave and figure out that this is where there are Dynamax adventures. This is the place in the game that you can find a ton of legendary Pokemon from past adventures. Essentially, you go in with a squad of you and 3 other people, and you have a lot of Dynamax battles, eventually leading up to battling a legendary Pokemon. While we don't need to go through every single battle, I think that these are actually pretty challenging, and you do have to think about the Pokemon you use because, well, you don't get to bring your own. That's right, you have to borrow Pokemon from whatever they give you, and you can steal some of the Dynamax Pokemon you beat along the way too. And at the end of my Dynamax adventure, we find a Suicune and catch it. After catching it, we speak to Peonia, who is exploring the place just as we are, and we head back. Apparently, Peony hit his head on some rocks while he was looking for his daughter, but regardless, we explain the situation to him, and he gives up on trying to convince her into joining his adventure, and he just invites us to join him. So we make our way to the main town of the area, Freezington, and we meet the mayor. He asks if we're here to learn about the King of Bountiful Harvests, and even though we're not, it does sound interesting now. But after talking to him, we head to Peony's house, and he tells us all the things he wants us to do. Apparently, there are a lot of legendary Pokemon in the Crown Tundra, including these dot-faced legendaries, which we know are the Regis, these bird Pokemon, and of course, the King of Bountiful Harvest that the mayor was talking about. He then gives us a couple clues so we can find out where these legendaries are, and we leave. But just outside, we meet up with Sonia again, and she's also here to look for some legendaries, and this time it's the legendary trio from Black and White. Now, there is a dedicated storyline, and I guess in order of how you're supposed to do this, but really you can do it in any way you want, and I decided to go explore a little bit so I can learn what the area looks like. And oh my god, this place is huge. I noticed that the Crown Tundra is significantly larger than the Isle of Armor, and even that was really big. But during our exploration, we find this shrine here, which I feel like Registeel might be inside. We have to whistle to open the door, which I think might be the first time I ever used whistle in this game at all, and we fight Registeel and of course catch it. Alright, now it's time to actually start the main storyline of this adventure. Now outside of Peony's house, there's this statue that is, well, I already know what this is because I play Pokemon VGC, but let's just say this is the King of Bountiful Harvest. However, he's missing his crown, so we go inside Peony's house and it's just on his table. Yeah, I don't know how that got here. So we put it on its head and it appears in real life and invites us to battle it. After the fight, it tries to speak to us, but it's a Pokemon, so it obviously can't. But then it possesses Peony and speaks through him. As strange as this is, it introduces itself as Calyrex, the King of Bountiful Harvests. Apparently, this Pokemon used to have supreme power and ruled over the Crown Tundra, but it lost its strength and it needs to know how it can get back to where it was. It believes that since people stopped believing in it and now think he's a fairy tale, he's grown incredibly weak. So we asked the people of the village village if they believe that the King of Bountiful Harvest is real, and they say no. They think that he's just a fairy tale and not actually a thing that exists. After all, it has been generations since Calyrex had any sort of power. So we report back to Calyrex of what people were saying, and then he says he needs to find his loyal steed, which we can see is on that statue. So to learn more, we go find the mayor, and he brings us to his house where he has a lot of books detailing the ancient history of the Crown Tundra and Calyrex. In one book, we learn that the steed liked to eat carrots, but some sources say it liked shade root carrots versus ice root carrots. So we go tell Calyrex this, and he agrees that his horse did like carrots, but now we need to find carrot seeds so we can maybe attract the horse. He says that there are really only 2 spots in the Crown Tundra that you can grow these, and of course, they're in 2 spots that we were alluded to earlier. One is near a graveyard, which is obviously going to grow these shade root carrots, and one is in the icy part, which is going to grow ice root carrots. Now, it is important to know that this is one of those choices in this game that is similar to Urshifu, where you do have to select the correct choice for which Pokemon you want in the end. It's kind of funny how they try to allude to this without actually spoiling that you will get this Pokemon, but yeah, we're gonna go ahead with the ice. Now, we go ahead and grow the carrot, and eventually we attract Galarian, the loyal steed of the King of Bountiful Harvest. It heads back to town, and we find it rampaging on the villagers, so we battle it and defeat it. After this, it runs away, and we go back to Calyrex to figure out what to do. And they said that if they had the Reins of Unity, it would be able to bond with the steed once again. So in order to make this, we need to get a piece of the horse's mane, which it dropped when it left, and a flower petal from Calyrex, which he barely makes. And then we need to have someone who knows how to make the Reins of Unity make it. But the problem is, well, those people aren't around anymore. We go ahead and try to ask the mayor, and he even says yes, even though he doesn't really know, and it doesn't come out well. But Peony comes into the room and says he'll do it. And yeah, he does it perfectly first try. Now, before we leave town, we can get Cosmog. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just here. Alright, now let's go to the Royal Shrine and actually catch this thing. After a long walk, we make it here and place the Ice Root Carrot down to bait out Glastrier, and indeed, it does arrive, and Calyrex hops on it and bonds with it. Now fused into one Pokemon, Calyrex offers us the opportunity to catch him so he can join us on our journey. And so, that's what we do, and welcome Calyrex into the team. And that is the main storyline of the Crown Tundra. However, it is not the end. We still have to catch a lot of legendaries, and let me tell you, I was catching these for like 3.5 hours. Of course, I'm not gonna ask you to sit through this entire process, but I'm gonna give you a brief breakdown on every Pokemon I caught and how difficult they were to actually catch. Alright, Regirock. So to get inside of his chamber, we have to equip a Everstone into the first slot of our party, and then we can go inside. He was pretty difficult to catch at first because I didn't know that you could paralyze rock types. Yeah, I guess I was confusing them with ground types, but yeah, the second we paralyzed him, we got him to 1 HP, we were able to catch him pretty easily. Next, Regi's. So to get inside of this temple, you have to have a Cryogonal in your party, and this was probably harder than actually catching the Regi this time around. For some reason, they made Cryogonal have such a low catch rate. I really don't get it. But once again, we went in, got it to 1 HP, paralyzed it, and then caught it. Alright, now for the last of the Regis, we have a choice. We can either get Regieleki or Regidrago, and I am going to go ahead and get Regieleki because it is one of the coolest Pokemon in terms of competitiveness. This is because it has a 200 speed stat, the fastest Pokemon in the entire franchise. But here's the problem. Since Regieleki is an electric type, I can't use my Boltund paralysis strategy, so I had to think outside of the box. And then I remembered one of the most broken moves in all of Pokemon, Spore. This has a 100% chance to put the opponent to sleep, with the caveat that most of the Pokemon that learn this kind of suck, except for one, Amoonguss. And fortunately for us, Amoonguss is in the Isle of Armor, so we go head over there and pick us up one. With Amoonguss by our side, we are able to easily catch Regieleki and get all of the Regis. Well, except for Regidrago and Regigigas, of course, because, well, technically Regigigas is in this game, but you need to have Regidrago, which you can't get without trading. Alright, now we can report back and start our next quest. Now, we're gonna look for the legendary sword Pokemon from Black and White, and the way we do this is by tracking these footprints and reporting them back to Sonia. While I was finding them, I stumbled upon this tree, and it awakened all of the bird Pokemon who seemed to be beefing. They spread across the region, so we're gonna go ahead and get them later. For now, let's go get these sword Pokemon. First, we get Terrakion, who was pretty easy to catch. Then we find Cobalion, which is also really easy to catch. But if you thought this trend would continue, well, it's not. Verizon, I still don't know how to say this guy's name. This guy was so annoying to catch. Genuinely, I don't know why this guy just wouldn't stay in the ball, but I had to restart this fight so many times and walk all the way back to this random spot he was in, and I think it probably took me about 30 minutes alone to catch this guy, maybe more. But eventually we did, and actually there is one more Pokemon we can catch from the Black and White games, and that is Keldeo. It's a very weird way of getting this Pokemon. You have to go to some random island in this area and make curry with the swords, and then when you leave making the curry, you can find Keldeo. Alright, now last but not least, the legendary birds. To be honest, the hardest part about catching these guys isn't even the actual catching part, it's getting into a battle with them in the first place. First, we go to get Galarian Articuno, and we have to follow this guy up this mountain, and once we reach the top, it breaks off into a bunch of clones, and we have to find the real one. Once we actually get into the battle though, we can catch it with relative ease. Next, Galarian Zapdos. This guy is in the wild area of the original region, and we have to chase this guy around until he eventually gives up. Once again, not that much of a struggle to catch once we get into the battle. And finally, Galarian Moltres is on the Isle of Armor, and this guy is very, very annoying to catch. He flies in a circle around the entire island, and if he gets too far ahead of you, it's gonna be really annoying and basically impossible to catch up. Not to mention all of these sharks always chasing you in the water. But eventually, we can catch up to it and catch it. And so yeah, we go back to Peony, show him all of our new Pokemon, and he gives us this golden outfit, which is pretty cool. And while there are a couple more things you could do on the side, that's pretty much the main adventure of the Crown Tundra, wrapping up the DLC. Now that I've played through the DLC for Sword and Shield, I'm left with a lot of complex feelings. On one hand, I really did enjoy this experience. There were so many things to do, particularly in the Crown Tundra, that it felt like a whole different game. Between having your Pokemon follow you around, to simply exploring how large the areas were, it was a much more similar experience to Scarlet and Violet instead of Sword and Shield. To me, a good DLC takes the experience from the original game and levels it up to a point where people feel like they really got their money's worth. But here's the problem. The base game wasn't really to a point where people felt like they got their money's worth. Why couldn't all of Sword and Shield have been open world like this DLC? The Crown Tundra alone felt like double the walking distance of the entire region of Galar, when it clearly only takes up a small portion on the map. Did Game Freak really have to push this game out that fast? I apologize if I'm not well enough informed on the development for these games, but in my head, they should have been able to take the time to make the base game just as good as these DLCs. I mean, everything felt so much cleaner in these, but who knows, maybe they wanted to make these DLCs seem a lot more worth it by intentionally leaving stuff out of the base game. I mean, even competitive Pokemon players at the time basically had to buy the DLC in order to compete, because there were some of the most broken Pokemon in history, like Calyrex and Urshifu. So how do I really feel about the DLC as a whole? I think it was certainly fun, and probably worth the money. But I really just disagree with DLC and Pokemon existing in the first place. So much of the DLC that we had to pay for this time around, we used to get for free in previous generations. And to me, that just doesn't make sense. And you know, I think that this DLC only made the reputation for Game Freak worse, which would only continue to worsen as time went on, because the next major release for Pokemon would be Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. Alright, let's get this over with.